Hello, Bermuda, and welcome once again to another edition of This Week in Government. Today, we're very pleased to be joined by Dr. Derrick Binns, who recently concluded his service in government as the head of the island's public service. Dr. Binns served in the public service for 37 years, working his way up the ranks in various positions. Dr. Binns is here to reflect on his distinguished career, the state of our public service, the role it plays in our everyday lives, and where it is headed in the future. Dr. Binns, it's a privilege to say welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
First of all, I want to get you to reflect on your journey. As we just heard, 37 years in the public service. That is a long time, but an impressive record at the same time. Can you give us a sense of how you started? I understand you began in the Department of Corrections.
Yes, I began in the Department of Corrections as the first psychologist for prisons. I was fresh out of my formal training, came back home. It was such a new thing to the service. They didn't even have an office for me at the time. They quickly found a room that they were able to convert, and I began, and it was a great experience. At the time, I couldn't think of a better job. I spent quite a bit of my time working with inmates directly, sometimes in a group setting, but the other beautiful part was that I also had a chance to work with the officers. So I was heavily involved in officer training and also heavily involved in officer promotion through the service. So it was a good experience, and it culminated with being the transition coordinator, leading the team that took us from what was the old casemates prison into the Westgate. We had to create a whole new way of operating, and we had a team together from the officers in the setting. We really produced all the new policies, all the new plans to make Westgate what it is. From there, I moved on to the National Drug Commission as research officer in the first instance, and then became the CEO for a number of years as well. That was the time when the NDC was what we call a quango, as opposed to a government department, heavily involved with creating new programs, new opportunities, working directly with a number of charities involved in substance abuse prevention and treatment. And from there, I moved into the ranks of permanent secretary and moved through a number of ministries over the years, culminating in becoming the cabinet secretary and head of the public service around 2013, and then from 2018 on, solely focusing on head of the public service role.
And to be a trained psychologist, that must be a very valuable skill to have throughout your career.
It has been very useful. It's helped me to be able to listen, to pause. It's helped me be able to analyze information, helped me be able to understand people and what makes people tick. So it's been useful all the way through, absolutely.
We can talk about the most valuable thing that you've learned, given your experience, learned about the island, given your time in government.
Well, perhaps the most valuable thing I've learned is our ability as a country to be resilient and our ability to be creative. Over the years, we faced a number of challenges, but we've come through each one. May not have come through without bruise, but we've come through. And in many instances, we've come through stronger and more adaptive. And it's demonstrated our ability to figure out how to make things work, figure out what to do differently. So I guess my short answer would be our resilience and our creativity.
You must have witnessed a lot of changes from your time, your start in government until recently. I'm curious, can you reflect on the change?
Oh my. When I think back to what it was like when I began, I probably would end up sounding like a dinosaur. At that time, every communication was done by letter. And so you'll receive a letter. Eventually, the letter would get through the system and get to you. You will review that letter, ponder about what it meant, and then you would craft a response. Maybe you would dictate that response. Maybe you'll write it out for someone else to type. Then after they've typed it, it'll come back to you, and you have to then review it and edit it before it finally gets back out. And in the best of times, it'll be about a week before a response was from the time of receiving and the time of getting that response out. Technology's made a significant change. Now, most correspondence is done by email. There's an expectation of almost an immediate response. We have service standards that dictate how much time should pass before we respond to an email, or at least acknowledge that email. So the expectation of responsiveness has increased significantly. Technology has enabled us to do things a lot more efficiently. Maybe some of the processes and what we do hasn't changed so much, but the tools that we now have available to do it have significantly changed. I remember even back in 2001, when I was applying to become a permanent secretary, I had to ask the question if email was available to me. I had to ask the question whether or not I would have access to the internet, because it was not something that was so common then. Now it's an absolute expectation, and if the email goes down, everything stops. Interviews were always done in person, meetings always done in person. Now we do many of our meetings virtually. We don't have to travel as much as we used to because we can conduct a lot of that work virtually. So technology has made a significant change in the way we work. Many people can do things on their own without having to rely on administrative support to get it done. That's been probably the biggest and most significant change, is the impact of technology on the way we work.
And speaking of technology, is it fair to say that the advances in technology has resulted in an improvement in efficiency in government?
An absolute improvement in efficiency, absolute improvement in time taken to get things done. But what it has also done is increase the burden. Now there's a greater expectation that things can be done. There is more work being produced. There's a greater expectation of work being produced. So the volume has increased. We've become a more complex society. That too has led to the increase, not only technology, but absolutely we can be much more efficient. I mean, I can think of some meetings that we used to do in person that would take no less than 2 hours, just given the nature of people getting together. That same meeting today can take place in 40 minutes.
Now, Dr. Binns, you're on record as championing the public service as the island's backbone. Why is that?
Because just about everything we do as a citizen of this country, as a resident of Bermuda, has been touched by a public officer. If you want to go and enjoy the parks and beaches, a public officer has probably been maintaining that beach or creating that beach. If you want to drive on our roads, a public officer has been maintaining that road. If you want to enjoy things that may be available through the private sector, they're often regulated or enabled by laws that have been created by the work of a public officer. If you really want to look at the impact on people's lives, the public officers have a significant impact on the everyday lives of Bermudians. So from that perspective, given the impact, the reach, the number of people that we touch, the lives that we touch, things could not happen without public officers.
And speaking of public officers, I mean, I'm sure you will know, and I know for well, that when you speak to some people in the community, from time to time you will have misconceptions about the role of what public officers do and the role of the public service, period, or proper. Can you reflect on that? Can you reflect on the most important things about the public service and about public officers?
I think we are a highly misunderstood and highly maligned group of people. Currently, and for some time, there has been a number of commentators who would like to see us as evil, lazy, good-for-nothing people. That is far from the truth. I'm not suggesting that we are all spotless angels by any means, and just like any organization, we have those who do not reflect the best upon us. But we are, by and large, a group of people who are highly committed to what we do. We are here because we want to be of service. We are here because we believe in the work that we do, and we work diligently. People who are exceptionally committed to what they do. All you need to do is drive by a government building in the evening and see the lights that are still burning. They're not just on because people forgot to turn them on. People are there working. An emergency happens. Who's the first to respond? It's going to be public officers responding. And they're doing it because, one, yes, it's their job, but they also are committed to what they do. So there are some highly professional, well-trained, very well-committed persons who make up the backbone of the public service. And for that reason, I will continue to champion them.
I also find that some of our public officers, they have a thankless job. and they don't often get the credit that they probably deserve.
That's true. And, you know, many of us are not here looking for the credit, but many of the jobs are thankless. I mean, I remember a time when I was the permanent secretary for Public Works, and I did not know that much about that ministry when I began there, so I really wanted to learn as much as I could about the ministry. So one of the things that I did that I will never forget, and I'm so glad that I did it, was I actually rode on the back of a trash truck one morning, and I picked up the garbage with the guys on the back of the truck. That was a time when there were many concerns about what was being put into the garbage and the impact that would have on the garbage collectors, issues around the quality of the trucks, and just lack of respect that was shown to those men. So I rode with them. Incredible change it did for me. I had a completely new perspective of the work that they did, the value that they provided to this community, and I realized that if that trash was not picked up for 3 days, we had a public health issue on our hands that we had to address. So the work they did was incredible. Not alone, just so very taxing. We started around 7 o'clock in the morning. We finished the truck was full around about 10:30, took it to Tynes Bay, dumped it out. At that point, I was completely exhausted. I could not go back on the truck and do any more. I went back, changed, went back to the office. They went on, and continued their runs. Very exhausting work, but exceptionally important work, exceptionally valuable work, and no, they do not get the credit they deserve.
You know, one of your important roles in government was to engage with our public sector union representatives, and I'm sure there's a lot of history around that. Can you share with us some of that history? You know, for example, what stands out for you?
What stands out is the importance and the quality of the relationship. And we are, as the union would often say, and they're absolutely right, we are social partners. And we are in this together. And so we would really rely on building relationships with each other on a personal level so that I can pick up the phone and call a union leader. They can pick up the phone and call me, and we can resolve issues at the earliest stage possible. Many think it's always about tension and fighting and two sides on opposite fences trying to get at each other. Not at all. It's really a good, healthy, workable relationship. I'm not saying that we always agree, but we work through it. And I think there's a commitment on either side to actually work through all the issues. So the highlight for me would be the quality, the integrity, and the importance of the relationships that we've developed.
And it must have been it can be very challenging sometimes when you have such a large organization with a lot of union representatives.
You know, we are probably unique. When I speak with my colleagues in other overseas territories, most of them are not unionized. Their public services are not unionized. And so when I speak of having 6, 7 different unions with whom we have to negotiate and with whom we have to work, and 6 or 7 different collective bargaining agreements, they just can't fathom it. And so it's a very different context, is a very different way of working, but it's an important way of working, and it makes it very complex having so many, and each one has its own agreement, each one has its own history, each one has its own context, but we have to work with and understand them all.
Dr. Binns, we're going to pause for a quick break, and if you're just joining us, we are speaking to the former head of the Public Service, Dr. Derrick Binns. We'll be right back after this.
Did you know that in a crash, the impact of a vehicle traveling at 50 kilometers per hour is equal to a fall from the top of a 4-story building? When the speed of the vehicle increases to 100 kilometers per hour, the impact is equal to a fall from the top of a 14-story building. Interestingly, airbags and seatbelts are less effective in high-speed collisions. This message is brought to you by the Bermuda Road Safety Council.
Welcome back. We're continuing our chat with Dr. Derrick Binns, the former head of the island's public service. Dr. Binns, between 2020 and 2022, you oversaw the public service during a very challenging time for Bermuda and the world, the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to get you to reflect on what was that like, the challenges faced to you and the entire public service to lead an organization with 4,000 people during such an uncertain time.
That was quite a challenge. I remember the day that some ministers, few senior officers were called into the cabinet office. The premier was leading the meeting, And I remember the decision being made that we were going to shut the island down. Unprecedented. And everyone, I think, was just somewhat frozen, recognizing the importance of doing so, but also not fully understanding what that all meant and how we're going to do it. My job was to immediately call in all the permanent secretaries and begin to plan how we as an organization were going to move forward. And I think they had a sense of what was coming. We had a WhatsApp group, so called everybody in. Everybody came in. It was a very heavy, solemn time, but we also understood what we needed to do. And we began to take on our responsibilities and began to plan about how we're going to make this work. And it was unknown territory, and we were learning as we went, but based on their commitment, their professionalism, and also their skills, we were able to make it work. And decisions had to be made quickly, decisions had to be changed quickly, but we did it. And the island got through it, and the public service got through it.
The fact that the virus spread so rapidly around the world, I mean, when you first heard the news that it was spreading overseas, I mean, did it ever cross your mind that, hey, this may lead to us closing the borders in the way we did?
Well, fortunately for us, health had been monitoring it before it became public information and public concern. Health had been monitoring it and giving us information and giving us an indicator of what might have to happen, including the closure of the borders, including shutting down the island, including what the likelihood of fatalities might be as a result. It wasn't all very glamorous news, but they had given us the indicator, so we were beginning to give it some thought. But even though we had the indicator and we're beginning to plan for it, when the call came to shut down, changed everything overnight. But fortunately, given the work of health in the front end, it made our job going through it a lot easier.
Now that we've gone through this pandemic and we're looking at what appears to be the end of it, is there a lesson somewhere in that for Bermuda? A lesson to be learned?
The lesson to be learned, well, there are probably multiple lessons to be learned, and I won't in any way profess to be an expert in this area. But I think one thing that we have learned is the importance of being flexible. I think it's also, we've learned the importance of not relying on yourself, but relying on the many people in the room and valuing the contributions of everyone in the room. Because out of those conversations, out of those discussions, the best outcome will be had. And it would be folly to try and rely on your own experience, your own instincts to get through it. So the value of team, the value of working with others came through shining brightly.
And throughout the zenith of the pandemic, there had to be a number of protocols implemented for public servants to continue to serve the public during such an uncertain time. Can you reflect on some of these protocols? The masks were one of the biggest ones.
There are a number of changes that we had to go through. And in addition to the physical changes we had to make about reducing the number of people in workspaces, wearing masks, washing hands, physical distancing, we also had to be very much sensitive to the impact of the virus on workers, on their families, and the impact of their families on them, and then to begin to manage our expectations of what we can expect from people based on the impact of the virus on them. Be concerned about persons who are in a workspace, someone else coming into that workspace, and their concerns about perhaps other person being contagious. So the sensitivity about the individual was absolutely critical, in addition to all of the physical things we had to do differently.
Another highlight of your career is that in 2021, you implemented the General Service Standards Policy. For those of us who have not been following, what is that policy?
Well, it's in simple terms, it's setting out what we want to establish as our expectations for the delivery of service. We've long had, since probably 2001, a code of conduct which talked about our behavior, that what's appropriate behavior, what's not appropriate behavior. But beyond that, what about the quality of service? And so the service standard seeks to set out the expectations regarding service. For example, with the telephone rings, how long should the telephone be ringing before somebody answers it? An email comes in, how long should it be before someone responds to that email? I mean, those are just simple examples. So we put in writing our expectations of the level of service that each department across the government should provide. Different departments provide different types of services, and they may have their own service levels within their department. Say, for example, immigration might say, we will turn around a passport in X number of days. So there will be things that will be specific to departments, and the departments will do that. But the general service standards were across the board for the entire public service. And the other side of it, it's not just internal. The public should be aware of those standards as well and know what they should expect from us and begin to be able to hold us accountable for meeting or not meeting our standards. And believe it or not, people do. I mean, people would write in and say, I tried to reach so-and-so, your service standard says that it should be happen in this amount of time, it did not happen. So people are taking note of it and they are holding us to account for it, and that's a good thing.
Another highlight of your career is that also in 2021, you implemented the Public Service Excellence Awards Program, the PSEA. And to date, I understand some 23 awards have been handed out so far. Can you reflect on that program? How did it begin?
Well, again, as I indicated earlier, a lot of what we do, it's not just me, it's really about a number of people working together, generating ideas. And the issue when we started that program was the public perception of public officers. And a lot of that perception is negative. But we also recognize that it does not truly reflect who we are as public officers. So this was a way to encourage people within the service that to let them know that their work was acknowledged, that their work was appreciated, and that they as individuals were valued. A second part of that was to communicate to the public that there are people within the service who were doing excellent work that was worthy of commendation. And we wanted to share with others all the good things that the public officers were doing. And this was a discussion among, in particular, the public service executive. It was really driven and led by the deputy head of the public service, Sherry Whitter. And it's been a great success. Public officers are really valuing earning this award. The beauty of it is that they are nominated by their peers. Their colleagues, their managers are the ones who make the nominations. And for many people, coming to the cabinet office, being greeted by the premier, discussing their work with the premier is a major deal. Some have never been to the cabinet office before. Some have never had a chance to have a conversation with the premier directly about their work before. So it becomes very, very meaningful for them. It's a great program. Really, really pleased with it.
And that's bound to do a lot for our officers who, in terms of boosting morale and as you said, knowing that your work is appreciated. And
from what we've seen, it's happening. I've got a couple great examples, and particularly with schools. There's been a principal that has won it. There has been a janitor from a school that has won it. And when they go back to the school celebrates them, incredibly so. Families really value it. We've had one team that won it. They brought their families into the cabinet office when they won the award as well to be a part of it. So it is having a major impact, and the impact that we had intended and even beyond.
Another program that comes to mind is the Public Service Feedback Policy. That was implemented this year, I understand. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yes. We had different departments doing different things. So some departments were very good about soliciting feedback on how they were doing. Many of them focused on complaints. They had systems in place to help people make a complaint. Some departments didn't look at it at all. So we wanted to have something that was consistent across the operation. We are one government, one set of employees, one set of rules. We're not 64 different organizations. And so we wanted to have something that was unified across the service. In addition to that, the previous ombudsman, had written to us with some concerns about not having a complaint system in place, because persons who are not satisfied with the service they get from the government have the opportunity to go to the ombudsman to get a resolution to their concerns. The ombudsman recognized appropriately that if we did not have an internal complaint system, it would be hard for us to do something about it. So when we got together to look at what we were seeing within the public service and what the ombudsman was requesting, we decided that we did not want to just focus on complaints and and negative issues. We thought the same system could be used to also encourage positive feedback. So if someone is doing something well, the public sees that, the public can then say, this person's doing something great. And we wanted that to be another part of us trying to really focus on enhancing the value and the visibility of public officers doing good things. And so it moved from being a complaint system into a feedback system. And so it's a system that will enable the public to let us as a public service know when we do things well. Then we can commend the officer. It's a system that will allow the public to let us know when we're not doing things well, and we can address it, and we can address it quickly. And if we begin to see a pattern with a particular officer, we can address that pattern as well. So we've now identified administrators within each department. We've done the training for most of those departments. And once the department does its training on using the system, and it's very easy, it's not a real burden at all, they would then get a QR code, and that they can then put that QR code on their emails, on their websites, on any communication. They can put the QR code up in their office place, and the public, all they need to do is scan the code, go straight into the feedback system for that department and for that service, and give their feedback very easily. And if they want us to give them a response, there's a spot where they can indicate that, and we will get back to them. If sometimes they don't want a response, and they can indicate that as well. So it's very easy for the user, it's very easy for the public service. We can then collect data. We'll provide reports to the department heads on a regular basis so that they can see what's going on, what issues are being addressed, so that they can address them very quickly. And so together with the service standards, together with the Public Service Excellence Award, we think this is going to improve the performance of the public service and really raise the standard that we all strive to do.
Dr. Binns, given your unique perspective on things, I'm curious to know your vision for a public service in the future, or your desire for it.
Well, I think building on the work we are currently doing with regard to service standards, the work we're doing with regard to acknowledging the good work that our officers do, the work we're doing with regard to getting feedback from the public, to build on accountability. My vision for the service would be that we will continue to enhance the quality of the service that we provide. My vision is that the service will become a service that is appreciated by the public, a service that is understood by the public, that the value that it brings will be obvious and without doubt. And I think a service that will be sustained and recognized as an employer of choice, so that when people think about the Bermuda government public service, they would think, that's where I want to be.
You think our public service ranks pretty high up there when compared to the overseas territories, for example?
That's a difficult question. Each of the territories have their own history, they have their own context, and just like waves, we rise and we fall. There was a time when Bermuda was the absolute lead overseas territory in so many ways. Many other territories would look to us for legislation, they'll look to us for policy, they'll look to us for how we do things. But there's been a lot of development across the territories. I think each of the territories have been very much focused on improving the quality of their services, improving the professionalism of the services, attracting very competent and talented people. So I think at this stage it would be difficult to say one is leading and one is lagging. I think we're all striving to be better. And we fondly call ourselves the G6. There are 6 overseas territories, UK overseas territories, that stay in good contact. And we share issues, we share challenges, we share resources. And I think that has helped us to maintain a level playing field.
Looking forward, I'm wondering, what can you say to young people who may be watching, or someone who may be considering a career in the public service, to inspire them and to encourage them to join?
Well, I can perhaps base it on my own experience. I mean, I was a young boy coming back, trained as a psychologist, just eager to begin a professional career. But I did not realize at the time the multiple opportunities that would be available to me by just walking in the door and working and doing well. Who would have thought that I would have ended up becoming the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Public Works I think I've told some others that when I first was assigned, I did not even know where the office was. I was so disconnected from it. But I was able to get there. I was able to learn so much more about the work of that ministry. Loved it, loved the experience. Where else would I have had the opportunity to lead a team that developed the policies to transition from casemates into Westgate? Where else would I had a guy from Glebe Road have a chance to go and run the National Drug Commission? So the opportunities are absolutely amazing, and there are opportunities that you can get nowhere else. But the other beauty is that the skills you develop in the public service are transferable outside of the public service. There are many great public officers who have moved on from the public service into the private sector, taking the skills that they've learned with us and using them in the private sector. So if you're looking for opportunity, you're looking for variety, looking for exposure, there's no place better than the public service to get it and do it.
Well said. As we wind down our interview, Dr. Binns, I'm curious to know, I'm sure a lot of people will be as well, what's next for you? You've, as we've talked about, 37 years, a long time in the public service, and very recently you've retired. I understand, for example, you're an avid musician. What can we expect, and a traveler?
Well, it's first I just want to breathe. I just want to exhale. It's been a wonderful career. I would not trade it in for anything, but it's also been 20 plus years at the senior executive level. And that's a heavy demand on an individual. It's a heavy demand on family. So I'm just looking forward just to release the burden, release the responsibility, and just exhale. I'm sure I know my wife has an extensive honey-do list for me, major projects, so I'll eventually get to that. But yeah, I play a few instruments. I would like to learn a few more. I would love to be a bass player. So thankfully, my team gave me a bass guitar as a retirement gift with lessons, and I will be absolutely taking advantage of that gift. And I want to learn acoustic guitar as well, and perhaps a few other instruments. But yeah, I'm gonna enjoy that.
But surely it will take some getting used to personally, not to be getting up every morning for the first time in so many years to go into work.
It is. It's going to be. It is a big adjustment. I've had a routine. I've had a schedule. I've planning, forward thinking for so long, and it's going to be very hard to get out of that routine, get out of that schedule, getting out of that driven focus, and just relax. But I am absolutely ready to do so, and I don't think it's going to be a major problem once I begin to make that disconnect. But it will take some time to disconnect. Absolutely.
Lastly, can you share some your opinion or your views on the future of Bermuda from a government perspective?
That's an interesting question. My wish for the future of Bermuda from a government perspective will that we will continue as a government, as a country, to uphold good governance standards, that we will continue to uphold issues of integrity, that we'll continue to uphold the understanding that we are here for the public. We are not here for ourselves, but we are here to provide a service to the public so that the entire country and everyone who loves this country can be enhanced and be better. And so my hope is that, and my expectation is that we will make great strides in that area. We will continue the work we've done thus far in that area.
Well, Dr. Binns, thank you very much for coming in and reflecting on your career today and sharing a lot of your insight with us. And once again, congratulations on your retirement. I'm sure I speak for all the public service in saying we wish you the best in your next steps and future endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And we've been talking to Dr. Derrick Binns, the distinguished former head of the island's public service. You have been watching the latest edition of This Week in Government. I'm Tarai Trott. Thank you for watching.